Hello, my name is Cynthia Bautista, and today I'm going to talk about how drugs change human behavior. This is my final project for PSY 341. Um, I'm going to give you an overview of drugs and behavior, a survey of recreational and therapeutic substances. Okay, so we are going to look at 4 different groups of drugs. We will look at drugs that slow you down, drugs that speed you up, drugs that make you see things, and drugs used as medicine for mental health. We will also talk about how these chemicals get into the body and what they do once they reach the brain. We will also talk about the parts of the brain they change and why that makes people act differently. By the time I'm done with this talk, you should be able to understand the science behind how these chemicals work. And we're going to see that drugs are not just good or bad, but they're chemicals that change how our cells talk to each other. Anyway, let's begin. We have 4 main goals for this talk. Now, I want to be very clear about what we're going to learn. First, we'll learn how drugs move through the body. This is important because a drug has to travel a long way to get to your brain. We'll also talk about how they get into the blood and how they get past a wall in the brain that tries to keep the chemicals out. Second, we will look at 4 specific drugs: alcohol, meth, LSD, and lithium. Now, these specific drugs belong to depressants, stimulants, hallucinogens, and psychotherapeutics, but we will be studying these 4 specific drugs that I mentioned previously. Okay, now third, we will talk about why some drugs are very hard to quit and why the brain starts to crave them. Finally, we will talk about safety. We will look at why taking too much of a drug can be very dangerous or even kill you. By the end, you should be able to explain how these different chemicals change the way a person thinks and moves. First things first, what is behavioral pharmacology? Well, before we get into that, here in the picture I provided, you could see the ADME process of drug absorption and metabolism. Now, this topic is just the study of how drugs change the way we act. There are 2 main parts to this that we need to understand before we can move on. So the first part is how the body handles the drug. This is the journey. It starts with how the drug gets in your blood, like if you swallow it or breathe it in. Then the blood carries it to your brain. After that, the liver has to work hard to break the drug down so it doesn't stay in your system forever. And finally, you will eventually go to the bathroom to get the rest out of your system. Now, the second part is what the drug does to your brain cells. The brain cells have tiny spots on them that drugs can stick to. You can even think of these spots like locks, right? So the drug is like a key. And when a drug key sticks to a brain cell lock, it changes the way that cell sends messages. It might make the cell send more messages or fewer messages. This change is what causes a person to feel a certain way or act differently than they normally would. On to the next slide. So here, let's take a look at the picture. Here is a pre-dynastic Egyptian pottery with both and figure paintings. This slide is going to be about the history and therapeutic use of CNS depressants, specifically alcohol. So the first group of drugs that we are looking at are called depressants. Now, these drugs slow down the brain. Alcohol is the main drug in this group. People have been making alcohol for a very long time. We have found old pots from Egypt that show people were making beer over 5,000 years ago. But why did they make it? For a long time, alcohol was actually used as a medicine. Doctors used it to clean cuts so they wouldn't get infected. They also used it to knock people out before they did surgery because it slows down the brain so much. It was the only way to stop someone from feeling pain during an operation. It was a very important tool for doctors for a long time, before the fancy medicines that we use today. And back then, it was actually one of the only ways to save someone's life during an injury. This slide is going to be about mechanism and behavior of alcohol. I provided a picture here, and it's a scientific model of an alcohol molecule binding to a GABA receptor. Now, how does alcohol actually slow down the brain? Well, it works on a brain chemical called GABA. GABA is the chemical that tells your brain to slow down or relax. It's like the brakes on a car, for example. So when you drink alcohol, it goes into your brain and sticks to the spots on your brain cells where GABA usually goes. It makes the GABA work much harder. It's like pushing the brake pedal all the way to the floor. This makes it very difficult for your brain cells to send messages to each other. Because the messages are moving so slowly, you start to feel relaxed and less worried. But if you drink more, it slows down the parts of your brain that control your balance and your talking. This is why people stumble and slur their words when they drink too much alcohol. If you drink too much, it can slow down the part of your brain that tells you to breathe. So when that happens, the body stops working, which is why alcohol can also be deadly. On this slide, we're going to be talking about toxicity and abuse liability. And the picture I have here is of the progressive stages of liver disease and cirrhosis. Alcohol is actually very hard on the body if you use it a lot for many years. It's also a drug that is very hard to quit once you get addicted. If someone drinks a lot every day, their brain gets used to being slowed down all the time. To fight back and stay awake, the brain tries to speed itself up. And this creates a big problem. If that person stops drinking all of a sudden, their brain stays in high speed mode. This can cause them to get very sick, like shaking hands or even have a seizure. Alcohol is also bad for your organs, especially the liver. Your liver has to clean the alcohol out of your blood every single time you drink. If it has to do this too much, then the liver gets tired and starts to get covered in scars. And this is called cirrhosis. Once the liver has too many scars, it can't clean your blood anymore, and the rest of your body starts to fail. It also hurts the brain by killing brain cells over time, which makes it hard to remember things or even make good choices. In this slide, we're going to take a look at methamphetamine, specifically the history of it. So in the picture I provided, you have a vintage World War II era Pervitin packaging, which is meth. So these drugs are actually the opposite of depressants. They speed up the brain. It was first made about 100 years ago. At first, it was used to help people breathe better when they had cold or asthma. In World War II, armies on both sides gave it to their soldiers. They did this so the soldiers could stay awake for days and days without getting tired or needing sleep. Meth is very strong because of how it moves through the body. It gets into the brain very fast. Once it's in the brain, it stays there for a very, very long time, usually about 12 hours. This is much longer than the other drugs like cocaine, which leaves the body quickly. And because meth stays in the body for so long, it keeps the heart beating fast and keeps the person awake for a very long time. And this puts a massive amount of stress on the heart and the brain. Now we're gonna take a look into the mechanism, the dopamine surge. In the picture I provided, there's the mechanism of methamphetamine flooding a synapse with dopamine. And actually, meth is very addictive because it messes with a brain chemical, which is dopamine. And dopamine is the chemical that makes you feel good when you do something fun. Like you're eating your favorite food or winning a game. It's the brain's way of rewarding you and telling you to do that again. Meth actually causes a huge amount of dopamine to flood the brain all at once. It's much more dopamine than you would ever get from a normal life. This makes the person feel a very strong high or rush. But there is a downside. Because there is so much dopamine, the brain gets overwhelmed. It starts to break its own sensors to try to protect itself from the flood. This means that after using meth, the person can't feel happy from normal things anymore. So food, friends, and hobbies don't feel good. They feel like they need the drug just to feel okay. This is why it's actually so hard to stop once you start. Finally, we're going to talk about behavior and toxicity. So in the picture, there's PET scans comparing a healthy and an addicted brain, the activity of both those brains. Well, when somebody uses meth, They have a lot of energy and they don't feel hungry at all. But using it for a long time causes serious damage that you can visibly see. It can make people act very strange or feel very paranoid. They might think that people are chasing them, or things like that. Meth is also very bad for the brain cells themselves, so it's actually a poison to them. Doctors have used brain scans to show that people who use meth for a long time have lost many of their brain cells. You can actually see dark spots in the brain where the cells have died and stopped working. It also causes the heart to beat too fast for hours and hours, which can lead to heart attacks, even for young people. It makes the body age extremely fast. It could also cause teeth to rot and fall out, and it could cause the skin to get sores that don't heal. Now, on to hallucinogens, specifically LSD. So in the picture here, there's a molecular structure of LSD binding to a serotonin receptor. We're going to look into the history and pharmacodynamics. So, these drugs change the way you see and hear the world around you. So LSD was founded by a scientist in a lab in 1938. In the 1950s, doctors thought it might be a great tool to help people with mental health problems because it changed how they thought. LSD works on a brain chemical called serotonin, and serotonin helps the brain filter out information. Usually, your brain ignores things that aren't important so you can focus. When you take LSD, it sticks to the spots on your brain cells where serotonin usually goes, but it gets stuck there and stays for a long time. This breaks the filter in your brain. Suddenly, your brain is getting too much information at once. It can't tell what is real and what is a shadow. This is why people see weird shapes, moving patterns, and bright colors when they take it. Moving on to behavior and abuse liability. So in the picture here, you can see brain scans comparing neural activity under a placebo versus the effects of LSD. Now, let's look at the behavior and why it's not addictive. When people use LSD, they see things that aren't there. They might also feel like their senses are mixed up. For example, they might say they can see the sound of music or hear a color. Even though this sounds very intense, LSD is not actually addictive like meth or alcohol. It doesn't mess with the reward part of the brain that makes you crave things. Actually, animals in labs will usually not try to get LSD if you give them a choice. Also, the body gets used to it very fast. If someone takes it 2 days in a row, it usually won't work the second time. The brain realizes it's there and just ignores it. So while it can be very scary or weird, those experiences that last for a long time, people don't usually feel a craving to keep using it over and over again. It doesn't trap the brain in the same way as the other drugs. Now let's talk about psychotherapeutics, specifically lithium. And here you could just see a picture of the periodic table for lithium. Basically, the history of lithium is that, lithium is very interesting because it's a simple salt found in nature. You can find it on the periodic table. In 1949, a doctor found that it could help people with a problem, specifically bipolar disorder. People with this problem or illness have mood swings that can be very dangerous. They have times where they have way too much energy and they can't sleep, and times when they're very sad and can't get out of bed. Before lithium, these people were often kept in hospitals for their whole lives because no one knew how to help them. Lithium was the first medicine that really worked to keep their moods steady. It allowed thousands of people to leave the hospitals and go back to their homes and jobs. It was actually a very huge discovery for science. Now we're going to talk about the mechanism, right? The intracellular thermostat. Here we have a picture of a diagram explaining how lithium promotes GABAergic neurotransmission at the synapse. How it works, keeping things steady. We're not 100% sure exactly how lithium works, but we know it helps keep things steady in our brain. It doesn't speed the brain up, and it doesn't just slow the brain down. Instead, it works inside the brain cells to work better when the person has too much energy. It also helps protect brain cells from being damaged by stress. Think of it as like a regulator that keeps everything right in the middle. It doesn't make the person feel high or happy. It just helps them feel normal. It actually keeps their mood from swinging too far in either direction. It's actually a very helpful tool for keeping the brain healthy over a long time for people who need it. On this slide, we're going to be talking about toxicity, the narrow window. So in the picture, you can see graphs comparing dose response curves for wide versus narrow therapeutic index medications. Now, the safety and blood tests. Lithium is not a drug that people use for fun, and it's also not addictive, but it could still be dangerous if you aren't careful. This is because the amount that helps you is also very close to the amount that can poison you. And this is called a narrow window. Because lithium is a salt, it depends on how much water is in your body. If you get dehydrated from exercise or you're sick, then the lithium in your blood can get too high. This can hurt your kidneys or your heart, And it's why people who take lithium have to go to the doctor for blood tests very often. Sometimes even every few weeks. They have to make sure that the amount in their blood is just right. It's actually a great medicine that saves lives, but it has to be watched very closely to keep the patient safe. And now that we've gone over all the drugs, let's talk about the societal consequences. So, let's talk about why all of this matters to our world. We've seen two different sides of drugs today. We saw how drugs like alcohol and meth can take over the brain's reward system and cause addiction. And this hurts families and costs a lot of money for hospitals. But we also saw how drugs like lithium can be used to heal the brain and help people live good lives. The big lesson here is that behavior is usually about biology. When someone is struggling with addiction or a mental health issue, it's often because the chemicals in their brain aren't balanced. If we understand these chemicals, we can be more helpful and less mean. We can treat addiction like a health problem instead of a bad choice. And science gives us the power to help people live better lives. Now, on this slide, I've listed the books and websites I use to find this information. Most of this comes from the textbook and from a government group called the National Institute on Drug Abuse. It's very important to use real science when we talk about drugs, not misinformation. There's a lot of bad information on the internet, and these sources help us understand the truth about what these chemicals are and what they're doing to our bodies. If you want to learn more about a specific drug, I would say that these are the best places to start looking. Now, let's see what you remember about the presentation. I have a couple of questions for you. First, which drug did we talk about that doesn't make you high, but instead acts like a thermostat to keep your mood from going too high or too low? I'm gonna give you 3 seconds to think about it. If you're thinking of lithium, you're correct. Remember, it's a mood stabilizer. Second, why is meth so much more addictive than LSD? I'll give you a few seconds. The answer is that meth goes straight for the dopamine reward center, which is the part of the brain that makes you feel a craving. LSD changes what you see, but it doesn't make your brain scream for more. Understanding that reward center is the key to understanding addiction. Last knowledge check. So, we talked about 2 drugs today that can be very dangerous if the dose is wrong. Which one is the depressant that can make you stop breathing if you take way too much? The answer is alcohol. and which one is the medicine that requires a blood test because the safe dose and the toxic dose are so close together. That's lithium. So knowing these differences is the whole point of this presentation. It's about knowing what slows the brain down, what speeds it up, and what keeps it balanced so we can keep people safe. The presentation is over. This slide is really just to thank you for listening to my presentation today. We've traveled through a lot of history and a lot of science. We looked at things like ancient Egypt, World War II, modern doctors, and I hope now you have a better understanding of how the brain works and how different chemicals change our behavior. When you see someone acting differently because of a drug, I hope you think that about the chemicals and the brain cells I talked about today. Do you have any questions about the 4 groups of drugs or how the brain works? Anyway, thank you so much. Bye.